Hello, everyone. Welcome to Module Two's reading overview video. The purpose of this video is to introduce you to some of the things you'll be reading about this week in the three chapters you're assigned. So the first chapter is chapter 4. This is titled People in the World, Human Dispersals to Australia, the Americas, and the Pacific. So we'll be developing some concepts that we were introduced to last week, specifically around technology and how technology makes us human, as it serves as the interface between humans and their environment. And we're going to apply this concept to how people have been able to migrate and populate the globe. And we'll look at the relationships that they forged with the tools and technologies that they had, with the resources that were available to them in these new environments. We'll be looking at boat technologies that were able to provide the transportation from one environment to the next, as well as things like the harnessing of fire, opening up home ranges in colder environments, and the clothing that came along with it that helped humans adapt to the harshness of these new environments. We'll also be looking at some tools that helped humans procure food, either through hunting or harvesting techniques, as well as tools that were used for processing these foods, like ceramics and other lithics. We'll be looking at the dispersals of human beings from three different contexts: that in Australia, the Pacific Islands region, as well as the New World, or known as the Americas. And we're going to look at some of the challenges that these environments presented to human beings once they dispersed into them. And one of the groups that we'll be introduced to in this chapter, and we'll be bringing up later in chapter 6, is the Clovis people, which is a Paleo-Indian group. We'll be looking also at some archaeological ethics, especially in relation to a couple of different archaeological findings, such as Ayers Rock in Australia and Kennewick Man here in the United States. Kennewick Man was an individual that existed around 9,000 years ago along the coast of Washington and became the point of conflict and debate between archaeologists and First Nations or indigenous groups here in the United States. And we'll be looking at what archaeologists mean when they refer to First Nations people or indigenous groups and the descendants of these groups today, known as Native Americans or Aboriginal Australians or Indigenous Pacifica peoples. And we'll be considering what some of their stakeholder positions are in relation to one another, including archaeologists. So we'll see also how institutional ethics have emerged from organizations such as the Society of American Archaeologists to develop over time and work to uphold a respectful relationship amongst stakeholders such as the archaeologists and indigenous groups that are connected to the context archaeologists are interested in studying. Chapter 5, titled Digging In, Responding to Climate Change in the American Southwest, will introduce us to the ancestral Plavoan people of the American Southwest, and we're using the word ancestral to emphasize the cultural affinity that their descendants who still live in this region have with them. And we'll be looking at sites all throughout the Southwest, including Broken Cay Pueblo and Pueblo Bonito. And some of these sites, Puebloan sites, you may have already been introduced to. One of the most famous ones is Mesa Verde, a national park in southern Colorado. Digging in is used in the title of this chapter to refer to two different things. First, the settling in and the establishment of permanent sedentary communities for the first time, as well as referring to the excavation methods used by archaeologists in order to discover what these contexts were like for humans when they first began to transition to sedentary ways of life. Then we're going to be thinking about this whole time in this chapter, how archaeologists know what it is that they know, how they collect artifacts through excavation, how they make observations of these artifacts to create data, and that this data is what is analyzed and interpreted by archaeologists to understand what the context of the archaeological past actually are. So we'll be thinking about how we know how old sites are with the use of relative dating techniques and absolute dating techniques, which will come up more so in chapter 6. We'll be introduced to the study of ceramics and how archaeologists use ceramics as a time marker, with relative dating techniques like seriation. Seriation is where we look at the form and the function and stylistic decoration of things like ceramics to learn what the chronology of events were in the past based off of artifact typologies that are developed in relation to their position in depositional time. Or in other words, we're going to identify the time period that artifacts were in use based on their attributes and where those attributes emerge in the archaeological record relative to different attributes of the same artifact type, in this case, namely being ceramics. So this chapter is very focused on the American Southwest, but in particular, we're going to be interested in how the effects of climate change and environmental changes had impacted their survival. We want to think about the relationships that ancestral Puebloans had to each other, as well with other cultural groups that were around them at that time, and the environment that they lived in, looking at how they addressed the climate changes in the past, which is a salient topic for our own current circumstances of climate change today. Chapter 6 is titled Extinctions in the Past. This is the last chapter that we'll be reading, and we're going to be considering the major theme, extinctions, and how we actually are a part of one today. We call it the sixth major extinction event on Earth. And we want to think about how humans and human nature has developed in conjunction with extinctions. We want to think about the question of whether or not circumstances of our current extinction phase is a new phenomena for humans to face, or if it's actually an extension of how humans have interacted with other biodiversity in our past over human existence. So if it's the latter, what roles have humans played in the past and previous extinctions? Well, we'll be looking at this, hoping to get a better understanding of biological extinctions and our relationship as humans to these extinctions through two interrelated factors. The first one being introducing new things to new environments that we come in contact with, as well as intentional habitat changes. So introducing new things to the environment. This could be something like introducing new plants or animals, such as rats, which is something that we'll look at in the case of Rapa Nui. As well, in the case of Rapa Nui, we'll be looking at intentional habitat changes, like the intentional act of tree felling in that context, which mixed with the introduction of rats and the introduction of infectious diseases introduced by European colonial explorers who first visited the island, how it nearly spelled out the demise of people on Rapa Nui. And we will also see how this extends to not just island habitats and contexts, but also in continental habitats and environments. For example, we'll be taking a look at how dogs affected the Americas once they were introduced to these places and had a significant impact on the endemic biota of this area. And as habitat changes, we will see rather important circumstances that archaeologists are interested in, environmental change. As it just so happens that humans are severely impacted by the climate that they exist in and really the changes of those climatic patterns. We will take a look at how stone tools and hunting practices that existed during this time also played a large part in the environmental changes. In particular, looking at how hunting some megafauna and other animals of prey in the past led to the extinction of some of these in conjunction with some of the environmental changes that were occurring. Specifically, we'll be looking at the Clovis projectile point technology and how this sort of acted as the big game sniper rifle of the Paleolithic, and how this technology coincides with the extinction of a lot of megafauna like the ground sloth that used to exist in Ohio, as well as mastodons. Even looking at how some of the hunting techniques of ancient peoples contributed to the extinction of large land birds like the dodo bird. And so we're going to be questioning how much of a role this Clovis technology had in producing megafauna extinctions and how much of it was just a larger part of other climatic and environmental trends of change that were ongoing at that time. So we're going to introduce more artifact dating methods that are more than just relative dating methods, but actually absolute dating methods, and how there are multiple different ways to conduct absolute dating, whether it be on inorganic materials or organic materials. We'll be focusing a lot on radiocarbon dating, which is used to date organic materials. And we'll see what this technique is sort of capable of and how this is able to be used in conjunction with one another to create chronologies of extinction events in the past, piecing together things like environmental change of organic materials over time, as well as how inorganic materials like lithic stone tools may have played a part in conjunction at the same time with these extinction events. I lastly want to point out the inquisitive exercises that are available on the Norton ebook interface. Hopefully this is accessible for you to use. And it will help you fine tune the knowledge that you're meant to retain from these readings. And doing this prior to the actual graded assignments that you're required to do is going to help you in those graded assignments. Okay, that's all I have for you today, and I hope you enjoy your reading. Thanks.